All right, so hello and welcome to the Introduction to the Renaissance edition of Honors World History. Today, we are going to talk about the major causes of the Renaissance in Europe. But first, I think it's probably important to establish what exactly was the Renaissance. So this is a really good definition for you to write down. So if you want to pause the video and write down our definition, I think that would be really wise. So Renaissance in French is Renaissance, which means rebirth. R-E, like re, and then naissance, which is birth. And essentially, starting in around 1400, really the dates are debated, but starting around the late 1300s into the early 1400s, we see European culture experience a reinvigoration in which they're really excited about art, about science, about scholarly traditions, about rediscovering their ancient Greek and Roman past. And we see this everywhere throughout Europe now as kind of part of our really intrinsic and integral cultural identity, right? So if we think about the Michelangelo's David or something like that, right, this is part of what has been brought down to us by the Renaissance. And I'm excited to talk to you about it today because it is one of my favorite things. So really what our purpose is in this video is to establish what causes this rebirth. Why is the Renaissance happening now? What has been going on in Europe? And why weren't they having a golden age like the other places that we've talked about so far? First, I want to establish where we're coming from in terms of the characteristics of medieval Europe that we discussed last week. So remember that Europe is divided into small, competing, small-scale, feudal states, and they use that feudal system, the hierarchy, right, with serfs and peasants, lords and knights, and then a king at the top. And you can see in this image just how subdivided Europe is, right? Europe has all of these small competing feudal states, and there's not a lot of long distance trade. There's not a big exchange of ideas. The Catholic Church and people's emphasis on trying to get into the afterlife and live a really kind of by the rule book existence according to the Bible, or at least what their priests tell them is in the Bible, is dominating, right? They're dominated by ideas of the afterlife. They're not really interested in the past. They're not really interested in humanity and what humanity is capable of, because they see humanity as sinful and just a stage that we need to get through. Like life is just a stage that we need to get through in order to make it to the afterlife. And that's how people are feeling in this medieval period. But throughout the course of the several hundred years since the fall of Rome and the Roman Empire, the people of Europe have still been surrounded by the echoes of Roman civilization and all that it was capable of. So on the right here, this is the Roman Forum in the center of the city of Rome, and it had been turned into a kind of cow pasture. You can see in this image, this is an image of the Forum of Trajan. How the people of medieval Rome and really medieval Europe, in England, in France, in Spain, how they had adapted to the ruins of Roman society. And they hadn't really thought much about them, right? They kind of thought they were haunted. They kind of tried to stay away from them. They saw them as these gross indicators of Europe before Jesus. And so people didn't think too much about them. But over the years, they were kind of like, wow, these architectural feats, the engineering here, we are capable of greatness. European society is capable of greatness. And what if we rediscovered that? What if we started investigating engineering and science and technology? What could we be capable of? This is happening at the same time and really probably driven by what we talked about last week, which is the Crusades. So remember, we have maybe as many as hundreds of thousands of Europeans going to the Abbasid Caliphate. And when we talked about the Abbasid Caliphate in Unit 2, we talked about how it quite possibly was this golden age of Islamic civilization. And so they're experiencing a golden age that's not their own. They're looking at all of the luxury goods that are traded on the Silk Roads that hadn't really been filtering that well into Europe. They're looking at all of the science, the medicine, they're hearing about things like the House of Wisdom, where scholars from all over the world go to Baghdad to learn, to translate. And the Muslims, while they're there, are even like, oh gosh, we read about Plato and Aristotle and philosophers like that, and we've translated all of them, we've kept them. Or how about medical pioneers like Hippocrates, who the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take still today is named after. All of these remnants of Greco-Roman society that had really been, in many cases, destroyed, but definitely not prioritized during the dominance of the Catholic Church in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. And so these Europeans are like, wait, hold on. We thought of this? You mean our world wasn't dominated by ideas of sin and darkness and punishment? And what can we do just to make sure we escape from this realm of existence into the next? And so they're taking these translations quite literally in kind of scroll and book form. They're taking them back with them to Europe, and they're spreading these ideas, and they're remembering what they're capable of. Then in 1453, which really isn't the Crusades, but it's really the end of the crusading period over in the Holy Land, the city of Constantinople is captured by the Ottoman Empire, who we talked about in the last unit, and so many Christian scholars are fleeing. They're fleeing into Europe, and so they're bringing more of that Greek and Roman thought with them. And the home of the Renaissance is really going to be Italy. Italy is where the Renaissance starts and where, to many scholars, it reaches its greatest illustration. And that's just a geography thing for the most part, right? If you're looking at this little map here in the inset, you can see how close Italy is to the Abbasid Caliphate, to later the Ottoman Empire, how the trade routes would have crisscrossed Italy more, how Italy is kind of standing apart because of its peninsula characteristics, and it's able to receive all of this. It's also the home of the Roman Empire, so like that helps in terms of just their proximity to the Roman ruins. So a final thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of causes of the Renaissance and why is the Renaissance happening when it does at the end of the 1300s and into the beginning of the 1400s. And something that has been debated a lot by scholars recently because they feel, I think, kind of icky about it, is the plague. So when we talked about the plague, right, we talked about how in some places, up to 50 or more % of the population is dying. But overall, the population of Europe is decreased by 1/3 over the course of the pandemic of the plague. And so you can see that the worst years here, 1347 to 1351. And so as it's spreading, it's really... it's stopping civilization in its tracks, right? The plague could kill you in as little as 3 days. It is absolutely and utterly devastating to society. And so we can kind of see some of that just chaos and devastation in this painting from the 1400s, just in terms of one, if we're painting about it in the 1400s, we are kind of generationally traumatized by this disease and what it did to our society, right? Think about how that level of mortality, right? Like how that would impact your view of the world, your view of what everything that you've known before. Is the Catholic Church to be trusted? Should we believe what it's saying about the afterlife and about God? And if we're being punished, all of these thoughts went through medieval people's minds. And because so many people died, we really start to see this introduction of this idea of humanism. So, and a focus on the secular. So secular things are not religious things. They are things of this world, and they're kind of put and juxtaposed or opposite to each other. There's religious versus secular. And part of this growth of secular thought and interest is the theory, the philosophy, if you will, of humanism. Notice the root here of human. What are humans capable of? How can we investigate human potential and individualism and a focus on that, right? So we start to see a lot more focus on the individual, and we start to see a valuing of humanity in and of itself, not as kind of vessels for a soul, but that like we are a creative and impressive species. Kind of that idea, the Christian idea of if man is made in God's image, then we should celebrate man just as much as we celebrate God. A lot of what is driving this is, like I said, it's the massive amounts of death, and kind of recovering from that. And so obviously there's the, what should we call it? Like the philosophical and intellectual impact, and then there's the more practical impact of that. So when we talked about medieval Europe and its class structure, and we talked about the manor system, and we talked about feudalism, we talked about how serfs were kind of this lower class of people who had to do forced labor for their lords. They weren't really free and they weren't really slaves. They were kind of somewhere in between, and there wasn't a lot of social mobility. So the impact of the plague on the population also means, right, that there are just fewer people. There are fewer serfs. And as things are starting to get back to normal, the lords are expecting the serfs to act like they always did. So they're expecting them to kind of, without complaint, just accept that they need to repair fences and stone walls and, grind the wheat and all of those tasks, those agricultural labor type tasks that they were doing essentially for free. And so because so many people died, the serfs at the end of the plague, when the lords are like, all right, so hop to it, let's go, you need to fix this fence for me. And they're like, ooh, so here's the thing. I've been reflecting on the nature of mortality and the value of the individual. Obviously, they didn't really say it like that, but you get it. And they're like, so I would like my work to be valued more. And because I'd like my work to be valued more, you should pay me to repair your fence or your wall or your castle. I'm not just going to do this work for free. And the lords are actually like absolutely just flabbergasted by this development. And so the lords are like, absolutely not. You're a serf. You're going to do what serfs always have done. And the serfs are like, okay, well, if you don't agree to our demands for higher wages, then I mean you could ask these other serfs that are around. Oh right, there was a pandemic and millions of people died, so I guess there's no one else to ask, so I guess you could pay us. And you can see that here, that after around 1350, right, wages start to go up as population goes down. And so this influx of not only wages, but also just the destabilization of the feudal system means that there is going to be a middle class, and that middle class is going to be the type of people who are going to care about art and literature and science, right? They're going to be the kind of people who are like, ooh, this sounds interesting, like let's get involved. And so it's in that world that we see this kind of medieval focus on Christianity and on the afterlife and on, right, that's why this painting over here looks so horrible and unrealistic, because like bodies don't matter, because reality, the real world doesn't matter. We're focused on heaven. That's all that matters. And so the medieval is like that, right? It's religious, it's otherworldly, it's about heaven. And then the why I chose the Mona Lisa, obviously because you all have heard of it, you've probably seen it. But the Mona Lisa really signifies for me and for other Renaissance scholars that we care about the individual. Here's a woman, her husband was a wealthy merchant. So merchant, middle class, right? So a new development. And in fact, as part of this growing middle class who's interested in art, they're also interested in the individual. They're interested in celebrating that. What's a way that you celebrate the individual? You have a portrait done, right? So think about the way that we use our own social media and our own kind of personal branding to celebrate the individual. In the medieval period, that never would have happened. But in the Renaissance, that's what we're getting into. That's what we're interested in. And that's really how we get there. So in class, we'll talk more about what this looks like and different developments that happened during the Renaissance. So thank you for listening.